Loud. Yeah, that's a different issue. Yeah. At least I couldn't last semester. Changes every semester. I don't know. Okay, so loops. And I want to bring up the actual project so you have a little bit of context here too. So this is going to be in regards to the address book. So what I think is probably the hard part of the address book, because the code is not there, is these parts where it says to loop, okay? So populate address book and display address book, okay? So what's a loop? If you guys had Java or some other programming, you probably know what a loop is. So I won't dwell on it too much. So loops are usually something like this. Okay, so and this is a great example. So this is what's called a for loop. So instead of repeating the same thing over and over again, which you could do if you knew how many items there were, right? You can do something like this. You set up a for loop, okay? So you set up a variable, and then you start with 0, so it indexes the first item of the array. So in our case, the array is the contacts, the address book contacts, and then you go up to the length of the array. Okay, and you can access the length of the array using .length. That's a property in JavaScript of arrays. Okay, so JavaScript makes it really easy to know the end of an array. Okay, some languages don't let you do that. You have to keep track of it yourself, which is bananas. Okay, and then this plus plus syntax, I think we talked about before. This is to increment the variable. Okay, so what happens here is this is the starting point. This is the condition at which the loop ends. And then this is how we increment, okay? So you don't always have to increment by 1. You can increment by 10. You could decrement. You could count down. So you can structure the loop any way you want, okay? These are separated by semicolons because these are sort of like statements, okay, in here. And then inside the curly brackets is the stuff that gets repeated. And if you use I, that I is going to, in this case, increase each time, and so you're going to get the result of this by doing this, okay? And so in this case, we only have 6 items, and we only saved a little bit of code, but in most cases, you're not only are you going to have more items than 6, but you're going to not know how many items you have, okay? So you won't be able to just hard code it. Okay, so that is one way to do that. Now, and I might as well pull this one up too. So then we also have another loop in JavaScript that is sort of common, and that is the while loop. And you can kind of do the same sort of thing here. You can have while I is less than 10, so you could do that same type of loop using a while loop. We could, we could say while I is less than the array length, and we could start I off as 0, and we could print it out, and then we could increment it. Okay, so this is kind of the same sort of thing. Okay, so it depends on the situation and what you're doing. You can usually accomplish the same thing with either one, but while is often used like when you're reading things in from a file or from a network, something like that. Okay, so you use a while loop. You're saying like while there's still more information, keep going. Okay. So, any questions about any of that? So in this case, I would recommend actually not using either of those. And so part of the reason is the guy who made JSLint, and I recommend at some point watching or reading JavaScript The Good Parts. He has a video series on it. But he actually does not like for loops. And for good reason, because if you're going to do a for loop, you usually don't know how many items you're going to count. So because you don't, what is it that you're counting, right? So you're usually counting an array, or you're counting in from a data file. So it doesn't make sense to structure it this way because you don't know what your condition is. Okay, so, and in this case, we actually have a method built into the array, into cars in this case, called for each. That's just cleaner, where it's less error prone. We can make mistakes here as programmers, where we could accidentally say 1 here instead of 0. We could say, it's just more error prone. Okay, so he actually recommends against that, and he makes a really compelling case. And if you want it to validate in JSLint, you should just not use for loops, or you have to check this box, or you have to add a thing to skip it in your JSLint header on your code. Okay, so what I would recommend is using the for each. And that looks like this. So, and actually, the easier way, so this is a fine way to explain it. But so you have your array. So in our case, we have an array of our address book items, and then we can just do for each and call this function. Okay. And you can, in JavaScript, you can do the function right in line too. So the function could appear right here. Okay, you don't have to have set up a separate function. It could be an inline function. And I'll show you that in my code, okay? Because I'm pretty sure that's how I have that set up. So we don't have to have a counter variable. That's done automatically. That's what index is in this case. And item is the actual item. Okay, so index is going to be 0, 1, 2. Item is going to be apple, orange, cherry. Okay, so if we run this, that's what we get here. Okay, that's what prints out. So for each is just a little simpler, cleaner, more JavaScript way of doing a loop. Okay, so anybody have any questions about that? Yeah.
When you call the function by function, why don't you call it with like empty parentheses?
Yeah, I mean that they're just using that as an example. So you're saying like why not just use the function in line here?
No, when you call the name, why don't you put empty parentheses in your header?
Oh, great. Yeah, that's a great question. So so he's actually asking like why aren't we calling it with the parentheses here? And that's because we're passing, and that's so. The reason you have to use parentheses when you call a function is because in JavaScript, without the parentheses, it's a variable. And so we're able to pass this as a variable to the for each method, which itself is a function. And it's basically a variable pointing to this function. Okay? So without being too complicated, like that's just the way you do it. Okay? But that's it's because this is kind of a pointer to this. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's a little confusing, but we're not really running it here, right? We're saying when we do this for each, run this, right? It's subtle, right? Whereas if we were just running the function, we would just run it here, be like inline.
So it's kind of like the item parameter.
Yeah, it is a parameter. This is a parameter to for each.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, and similarly, we could do the function in line. Okay, so we could go item index, and we could just have it in line. Okay. I'll probably have a syntax error here, but. I think that's right. Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of the same thing. And for simple things, if it's only going to be a line or two, especially, or if it's just like kind of like a one-off thing, or if you're already like in our case, it's like display. We already have like a function that we're calling to display the address book, so it's pretty clear what we're doing, what it's all about. I would just put all the code right in here. There's no reason to make another function if you don't want to. Okay. Okay. And the other thing is index is optional. So if you're not going to use the index, if you're not going to use the number, you don't have to. Okay. And in fact, if you're not going to use the item, you don't have to have item in there either. That could be optional too. So you only put those in if you want to use those. Okay. Cool. So then kind of the last thing on this track is just to give you just a glance at what I had for my code in there. I think I might have shown you that in the first place, but just as a refresher as to kind of how I did that. And again, you could use a for loop, you could use a while loop, you could do it with the for each, or you could come up with some other way to do it. You're the programmer. That's totally your call on that. So on the populate, this is how I did populate. So this again, I did the function just in line right here. Okay. So this is the item. Contact is the item. So I'm calling it contact here. So for each of the items in permanent contacts, I'm calling it contact, and then I'm passing in, or I'm setting up a new contact object with each of the contact properties from contact. I'm creating a new contact object, and so that I can add these to memory. Okay, so this is what I'm pulling from the permanent storage. Okay, so that is that one. And the display is similar. Okay, this looks a little bit more complicated, only because I'm doing some error checking here. So like I'm checking to make sure memcontacts exists, and then I'm making sure that it's got greater than 0 items in it. Because if it's not greater than 0, there's no reason to do it, but you don't necessarily have to. So I'm doing like these 3 probably somewhat redundant checks on things. I don't think I have to do all 3 of these. I probably could just do maybe this third one. But you could play with that if you want to. And then this is the actual for each. Okay, so this again is to display. So most of the work is done by the print contact method that is part of the contact up above. Okay, but then we're really just doing this for each, and we're calling print contact, and we're adding it to this to display variable, and then I'm just printing it out. Okay, just like we did before. We're just doing it inner HTML. This is just like the hello world. Okay. So this is like hello world with a loop. Okay. Any questions about any of that? It's meant to be a little hard. And again, like all of that documentation is that is in W3 Schools. So you could use a for loop, you could use a while loop. You can use the do we have that in here? It's for each. Where is for each listed? I always have to look it up. For each. Oh, so they have it under here. Oh, under the reference. Okay. So you have, if you want to use the for each method, you can just call for each. Or if you want to just get the length that's .length, then you can use a for loop or the while loop. Okay. So .length just works like this. If we want to get the length of this one, banana, orange, apple, mango, and we want to just get the length, it's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So that's what fruits.length is here. If we add another one, what do we have? Okay, so we'll just add another one, maybe. Oh, I have to run it. Okay. So So if I, you know, or I can push an item onto there. So I could say fruits dot push. Let's see, cherry. I'll probably get the syntax wrong here. This is another method we can call here. Okay, now it's 6 because it added cherry to the end of the array there. And we could also go, oops. We can also pop things off. And that'll actually take things off of the array. So I actually cut things out of the array now. So now it's only a length of 3 by running pop. Yeah.
Is there a way, because of the array with just the name, like if it's in the middle of the array and that's the name, you just cut it off and that's that name?
Yeah. So that is. So in this case, if it has a specific name, so you'd want to cut it out with a specific name. So you probably want to loop through. So in that case, I would do a loop, and you'd find the item that matches it. Yeah. So this isn't an associative array or a dictionary like you might have heard of in other languages. This is just like a regular array in this case. Yeah. So that's a good question though. And there is probably an easier way that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head to do that. But you could definitely do that with a for loop and find the item, and you could pull it out that way. Okay. So you could get the item. Let's see. Actually, this is the one. This will actually find the item. Okay, so index of. Yep. So this will get the item number. So in this case, we wanted to get the item number of apple, right? So and it starts with 0. Arrays start with 0, right? So 0, 1, 2 is apple. Okay, and so then if you wanted to take it out of there, you could manipulate the array that way, or you could just access it that way. Okay. That is an awesome question. Yeah, good. That's harder with objects, though, because when you're doing if you're just doing a simple string array like this, you can do a thing like this easily, but it's a little more complicated when you have like we're doing with contacts. But yeah, good question though. So, anything else? Did I put everybody to sleep? Sorry. I don't mean it to be boring. That's why I think it's better to do projects. But all right. So I will stop this.